When I started learning the basics of photography, people had to explain it to me a dozen times before I understood. Aperture, ISO, shutter speed, exposure, how do these things all come together to make a good picture? So I'm going to explain them in the easiest way I possibly can. Let's go check out Hawaii. Exposure, it's the brightness of your image. And that brightness or darkness exists in the real world. There's a certain amount of objective light that is out there shining. Exposure is how you decide to interpret it for your photo. You could control the light, or you could be in an uncontrolled environment like we are right now using natural light. Something I got hung up on when I started with photography was the idea of correct exposure. But there really isn't such a thing. I mean, it's more about your creative interpretation of how bright you want your image to feel. More important is the ratio between the dark and bright parts of the image. And since we're talking about the basics today, the easiest way to start is with a similar brightness on your subject and on the background. This isn't necessary, there's a lot of different ways to shoot, but it does get you started and will carry you through a whole career if you want, having that same ratio. In this shot, our subject, Anya, is being lit by the sun in the foreground, and the sun is also shining on the temple behind her. If it were in the shade, then we'd also move her into the shade. But sometimes the background is the subject. So in that case, you just have to worry about the light that is hitting the temple in this situation, which can either be sunlit or in the shade. And now it's up to us in camera to decide how we're going to interpret that amount of light. And we have a few different tools to do it, starting with Aperture. Here's the simplest way to understand how a photo is taken. Every camera has either a digital sensor or a piece of film inside, and it's sensitive to light. So the more light that hits that sensor, the brighter that part of the image is. So if you're to take the sensor and just leave it outside in the sun, the whole photo would be pure white, be completely overexposed. So if you want to start controlling the light coming into it, the first tool that we have is the aperture on our lens. This lens has its aperture markings on the outside, so it's easy to demonstrate. If I go to the most open setting, which is the lowest number on this lens, it's 1.7, and I open up the aperture, you can see it's just the whole lens is open. It's a big hole for lots of light to come through. Now if I close the aperture to 16, it makes the hole very small. An aperture, it's basically a hole or an iris similar to what your eye does in bright or dark spaces. A big number is a small hole, so less light can come through. A small number is a big hole, so more light can come through. That's the first variable we have to play with. And the next is how much time we allow that light to hit our sensor. So while our sensor is seeing the light, we can also change how much time there is for those light particles to hit the sensor. And that's our shutter speed. The shutter is a little mechanism inside the camera that opens and closes. And when it's closed, no light is getting through. In photography terms, 1 second is a really long time, so we're usually talking about fractions of a second. So here, now I'm going to set it to 1/15 of a second. That's still pretty slow, but you can see it open and close. So now if I switch this to 1/30 of a second, it's a little more normal, it's pretty quick. You just see it open and close really quickly. If it's really bright outside, I could turn this to, let's say, 2/1000 of a second, and it's so fast, it's hard to perceive it. So the more time, meaning slower shutter speed, that light has to hit the sensor, the brighter it's going to be. You want it to be darker, you have a faster shutter speed. I want to recommend another great resource for learning about photography, and that is Flipboard. Flipboard has always been a great visual way to enjoy photography content, big on your iPad or your phone or your computer. It makes photos look great and brings you fresh resources to learn how to get better at it. But now they have launched some brand new photography features. The app is a great way to get your news from any variety of sources, but what I especially like it for is following specific topics. Like, I follow technology, obviously, and Apple news, but lately Flipboard has been really focused on resources for photographers. So not only can you follow people that you like me, but there are also new features like the shot. It's a way their editors can showcase incredible photographers from around the world to keep you inspired. One section I'm obviously a fan of is dedicated to videos to learn photography. So this is all sorts of tutorials and ways to improve your skills just by watching videos. And it's a really easy experience to just dive into them right within the app and start watching. They've also got you covered for the latest gear announcements, events, so you'll never miss an online course that's teaching exactly what you need to know. Or check out Photo of the Day, where they're just going to show you a great image every day. It's as simple as that. And of course, Flipboard's a community too, so whenever I like something, I just flip it into one of my magazines. I can put this into 4 photographers, and you can share that inspiration with other people. So now if you take a look, here is my 4 photographers board. And like I said, I recommend you guys follow me because I'm posting all sorts of stuff, even the latest YouTube videos I've been enjoying. To keep learning about photography, follow me at flipboard.com/Stalman. I'm posting helpful links there all the time. And thanks again, Flipboard, for sponsoring this video. So aperture, shutter speed, those to me are the primary ways you're thinking about your exposure. And if you watched other videos, they probably talk about a triangle of exposure because there's one missing element, and that's ISO, or ISO. Or it's the setting that determines how much light the sensor will absorb every moment that light's hitting it. It's the sensitivity. So for example, in the film days, you might be shooting at ISO 100 or 400 during the day, and as the sun starts to set, you'd switch to 800, making it more sensitive to the diminished light that's available. And now you have a clear understanding of how cameras have always worked. So I'm gonna throw you for a little twist. When you're using a phone, most of them don't change the aperture while you're shooting. It's fixed, it stays the same the whole time. And all that's changing is your shutter speed and ISO. So that's why when it gets dark, you get a lot of extra noise in your image. Okay, I'm gonna explain this in the simplest way I possibly can. Let's pretend that the sand, this is the actual light, and this shovel, this is our light source, like the sun or, you know, a lamp in the studio. And our bucket, this is our sensor. Now let's make an aperture. Now we want to control things even more, so it's a good thing I brought a shutter to the beach. Okay, and very important disclaimer here, do not fill your image sensor with sand. It will ruin your camera. Now, if we start to just shovel the sand, the light, into our sensor, we can just quickly fill it up. It's just kind of getting dumped in there. There's really no control over the light going in. So to control how much of that light is going in at any moment, we're gonna modify the aperture. We're gonna build a little funnel out of paper here. And the word aperture, it just means the hole, the size of the hole that the light can go through. So we can make that smaller, or we can make it bigger, and obviously the sand flows through at a different speed depending on if it's big or small. Now we actually need a bit more control to be more precise about our lighting. The other thing we can do to change how much light is coming into our bucket at any moment is add a shutter, which is just a way of blocking light completely so that, you know, unless I move it out of the way, there's no sand that can get through the top. So we start off by blocking our sensor and we move it out of the way, let a little light through, and then close it up again. That's what the camera is doing all the time. It is moving a shutter out of the way and closing it really quickly to let some light in. The quicker you open and close it, the less light gets through. Or if you hold it open longer, more light can come in. This is the relationship of shutter speed and aperture. You can have a larger hole so more light can come in more quickly, and then you can open and close the shutter at whatever speed you like so that only that select amount of light hits the sensor. I know that it's one thing to understand these terms, but putting them into practice is a whole other, so check out some of the other videos I've recorded about photography, or check out my Flipboard, flipboard.com/Stalman. I'll see you guys over there.